Read books by people whose perspective is different from yours. Listen to voices you haven't heard before. Look for narratives that are new to you. In them and with them, you might end up finding more room for yourself. Each of us carries a bit of inner brightness, something entirely unique and individual. When we learn to foster what's unique in us and the people around us, we are able to build compassionate communities and make meaningful change. Michelle Obama in the book The Light We Carry. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, friends, to the season 2 of Life Talks, acronym for Learn, Inspire, Fully Engage in Thought, Action, Lesson, Knowledge, and Service. Life Talks was obviously inspired by TED Talks, and it took shape during pandemic lockdown, where it also served the purpose of staying connected. Life Talks is an online platform for people to talk about their ideas, their journey, and stories of varied experiences, both personal and professional. The main purpose of Life Talk is to share different perspectives, different stories by different people, and to keep exploring, encouraging new ideas with an open mind. Stories connect us to one another, and they increase our understanding and empathy. We are very happy to have Mrs. Rathna K Prasad as our first speaker today. Welcome, Akka. Born in newly independent India into a strict household dedicated to education, Ratna had an unusual childhood in Kolar Goldfields, a mining town known as Little England. After schooling in St. Joseph's Convent, she was drawn to study mechanical engineering, to graduate as the first female from the Department of Internal Combustion Engineering from the illustrious Indian Institute of Sciences. Ratna started her career as a senior research fellow in National Aeronautical Labs in Bangalore and was awarded the prestigious Pochabradsky Scholarship to pursue PhD in Cambridge, England. But it was not to be. Destiny had other plans. The young family moved to America instead. In 1975, Ratna started a professional engineering career in Sargent & Lundy, a Chicago design firm for nuclear power plants, followed by leadership positions at AT&T Bell Labs in New Jersey, concluding with a successful startup company in healthcare technology, all this while raising 4 wonderful and successful sons. Professional women in engineering were a rarity at that time, and Ratna was a pioneer in each of her roles along the way, writing a maternity policy for the Chicago firm and becoming one of the first female department heads of color and of South Asian descent in AT&T Bell Labs. Staying true to the early emphasis on education as the only path for women to break barriers, Ratna continued studies in parallel along with her professional career at Illinois Institute of Technology and Wharton School of Business in University of Pennsylvania, earning postgraduate degrees in mechanical engineering, computer science, and business administration. She reminds me of Goddess Durga with 8 hands. Normal people like us have 24 hours, but I think she has 48 hours in a day. And I invite you to enjoy today's talk by Ms. Rathna K Prasad. Welcome, Akka.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for that beautiful introduction, Annapurna. You inspired me to look back a long way and collect things that happened over the 48 years plus. Hopefully, we'll talk about it in less than 48 minutes and share just the highlights. It's our story, really. It's the story of all of us who came as immigrants from our countries to be here and do the best we can every single day. That will be a real background of what we're sharing. Hopefully, it will resonate. Some of the stories will resonate with each of you. I'm glad you shared about my background. Honestly, none of us is an island, and we do come here with whatever values were instilled in us. For example, my mother really instituted a love for the pursuit of education, and she showed that by example. She did it all her life. My father taught me to be nice and was the encouraging voice in my life who said you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. And as you pointed out, the Pochabradsky Scholarship that letter that arrived on February 1st, 1974, 2 years plus since we were married, newly married couple with a young child, that caused a change. We were almost settled. We were going to walk along the path that had been set. And when I got that scholarship, I was very eager to go. And my husband was had already applied. 1969 or thereabouts, there was a new law passed here, and that allowed people to come on immigration and have labor certifications. As a young student, in college, he applied for it, and it had been approved. So it was a debate. It was basically, we had come to a crossroads, India, England, or America. But seeing these opportunities, we said we will go to America. And after that, I was determined to go through the number of paperwork and number of things that had to be done. And by 1975, my husband left to see if he could get a job before we came, and we followed soon after. Those of you who came here know at that time that it was really leaving a known world, a world of loved people, people that cared for us, and a way of life that was very familiar to us, and suddenly making a leap, because the younger people here cannot imagine a world where there was no internet, no cell phones, no Google, no maps. Anything you wanted to find out about, you walked on your 2 feet and talked and heard, listened. So that was the world we came from. And we were going to a world that we knew nothing about. So here we are, making the leap, about to leave India with little money in our purse. That was the allowed amount, a 20-month toddler, 6 pieces of luggage, no wheels, no idea about jet lag or time difference. We just got on the plane, waved goodbye, and I tell you, truly felt like a mini death, leaving everything behind and jumping and leaping into the unknown. Exciting as it was, it was also terrifying. So there we were, not knowing much, the pilgrims who set out on March 7th, 1975 from Bombay. And pretty soon, after a long and tiring journey, we landed in JFK in New York City, where we knew my husband had already landed. A letter had arrived in the interim since he left that he was in New York City. And my very first footstep on the American soil was to begin with the toil. Had a lot of luggage, a sleeping child, walked so many feet, took the one piece of luggage and continued on plodding. And at the end of every corridor, you turned and there was yet another corridor. I really thought JFK was made of endless corridors and a maze. Anyway, I eventually came to the arrivals counter, and I hope it will bring memories for you all. At that time, the counter clerk looked at the names: maiden name, Cherkupalli Allapragada; given name, Ratnakumari; married husband's name, Maheshwar Prasad; married name, Kasinadhani. I don't know what wheels turned in his head, but at any rate, he went through and he stamped a card and gave it to me. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the coveted green card. It was not green, it was brown. And it did not say green card, it said alien registration card. And I did feel like an alien who had just landed on a planet. And I met my name for the first time, Rathna K Prasad, christened there or named there by this counter clerk. And there we were, ready to go, ready to move out and meet my husband, who I hadn't seen some months. And surprise, there was one lone person hanging around there, wondering if this woman and child will show up ever, because the last persons had hardly left 2 hours ago. And it was not my husband. It was Mohan Pingali, my maternal uncle's brother-in-law, who had been called to go to from Philadelphia suburbs. He drove to JFK on a weeknight and to pick me up, drop him in his brother's house in Raritan, New Jersey, so I could catch a flight to Chicago next morning. And then he went back home. That was the beginning of a particularly important experience, which was the generosity of people who were already here, understanding the helplessness of new immigrants. And this is how I landed in Chicago the next morning in a silk saree and slippers in the middle of a snowstorm. and was happy to see my husband and his classmate Madhu Ahuja, who I think also joined the call. He was the one who sponsored us, and they were such kind people, helped us with $100 to get us through for the next few days. My husband had already had a good interview, but we hadn't heard back anything. And I can tell you that, and the Guru Nani family, who they knew, they helped us to move that night into a rented apartment on a pre-war building, a third floor walk up, with the understanding that we'd pay the rent after we got jobs. This was how there were so many helping hands, and it was a beautiful experience. And I have to tell you, I truly fell in love with Chicago. This was President Carter's Chicago. There was no energy crisis yet. Every light in every building and every corner was blazing. And it was like some kind of a winter wonderland. And we were enjoying. But at the back of my head was the fear that the money was running out. Those grocery stores were simply compelling, Brock's candies and heaps and shelves that were shining with all kinds of wonderful things. But the money was beginning to dwindle. And I was worried. We looked at all the Sunday papers looking for ads and so forth, and learned to our shock that America was going through a very significant job recession in the market. So now, worried about the outcome that we still hadn't heard from Sargent and Lundy when my husband applied, I started looking at the only other available thing that was free and delivered to our doorstep, so to speak, the Yellow Pages. I'm not sure what I was looking for. And then I said, let me get and see what I can find. So page after page. And suddenly, after a long, you can see A to K is one book, L to N is another book. A long time, a name jumped out at me, Hal Iyengar. Now, there was an Indian name that I could recognize, and he was a partner in Skidmore, Owings and Merrill at 30 West Monroe, and he was, most importantly, from the Indian Institute of Science. I was so excited. I felt like life had talked to me, and now I was listening, and I picked up the phone and called this gentleman and wonderful person, another person who was an immigrant maybe a decade or two before me. And he told me to come the next day, April 4th, 1975. It was a Friday. And then he said, I see your qualifications, but the only job available that here is that of a draftsman. I was happy to accept it. And there I was, a draftswoman, working on transferring drawings, engineering drawings, and they were building the Jeddah airport. So when you go to Jeddah, you know that there was a tiny bit of my hand in it too. And these was a very good company. And Dr. Iyengar was a great man. He was involved in building the John Hancock building, the McCormick Place, the Sears Tower, and it's a great company. And I did then what I learned was the right thing to do in India. Put your head down, work hard, you will get noticed. Unfortunately, it didn't work out quite that way. I did put my head down, and people were very nice, but there was nowhere else to go. I just continued to be drafting, and I was now pregnant. So the point was that I thought I should do something that is in engineering. My husband immediately got a job as well, so we were better settled, as you might say. And when I went back after maternity leave with Serini being born in 76, I joined Sargent and Lundy on October 16th, 1970. I don't know why these important dates stick, but they do. 1976. It was a whole different experience in Sargent and Lundy. It was wonderful. The support group there, Mr. Anwar Ali Khan, Baikar Chatosian, Lenore Khan, they were all wonderful people who helped us to learn more. And by now, I was slowly anxious to find a home in a good school district. Now try doing that without Google. When we call somebody, they say, we are not allowed to give out information that compares schools. And so there was really nothing much to do but talk to people. And talk we did, and finally decided to move to Naperville. And it was a wonderful place. My mother thought we were in the middle of cornfields at that time, but that's how it was. We moved and found it to be easy to commute to the city, and had the children in daycare, and we were slowly getting into that routine. This is when I worked hard, but I did not put my foot down, my head down either. So I was actually looking around, learning, and trying to make a difference, trying to add value. I remember one day Larry Lozier came around and said, this was the McKinsey days where people were being interviewed in sort of interesting ways. So I guess he thought that was a good thing to do. So he gave us a very peculiar problem. It was nuclear power plant structures that were building, supporting pipes. And he gave us, what if suddenly an airplane crashed into the building and there was a seismic event and so forth? How would we design these pipes? People jumped on pieces to their places, and we all pulled out our yellow pads wanting to work on it. And I just had an idea that I'm now learning Fortran. I'm learning about finite elements. How about I write a little program to put in all these variables and see what it happens? Those of you who remember those 80 hole punch cards and the do loops, that was what I did, and submitted it on the 29th floor, which was fully occupied by the IBM computer, and waited to get some results. The interesting that happened is it was not so much the outcomes, but the impact on perception was noticeable. The bosses in Sargent and Lundy, who saw me as this Indian woman, who, by the way, I was also going to night school along with my husband. Like the yellow pages, we read the small print in the HR document, which said if we studied engineering after work hours and got a decent grade, they would reimburse it. Well, this was like a gift. So we didn't think, is that difficult? Is that not difficult? We just went straight. And Monday, Wednesday, I went to school. Tuesday, Thursday, my husband went to school. We were studying. The idea was to do PhD. And more important, to keep our skills upgraded. So this went on for a while, and computer science began to become a thing. So we're starting with databases, started taking those courses as well. We were just collecting courses. It became a 12-hour a day. You come to work and then go to school and then go home just to do it all over, rinse, repeat every single day. But we were making friends, we were having weekend gatherings, and we were understanding more about the world and sharing and enjoying life on weekends and so forth. So as this was going on, yeah, I want to say that we got to that point really because of the helping hands. I mentioned to you, there were a lot of people who helped us all along the way. And I really, as I talked today, or as I was preparing to talk, I told myself, we could never have made it without so many helping hands. They never forgot how hard it was to be a new immigrant. And we in turn decided that as soon as we could, we would help our own siblings, our extended families, friends to have the same kind of opportunities that we had. And it was a good thing. So since we're talking about my professional career, there's the degrees from India were a big help in Skidmore to getting a foot in the door. The degrees that we got from Sargent and Lundy engineers were the masters in mechanical engineering and masters in computer science. It was a good time. Life was changing even in Sargent Lundy. Y2K, if you remember, was a big thing at that time. It was like the world was going to fall apart. Software was going to come to a screeching halt on the last day of 1999. So there was so much of work going on. Droves of people left to get involved in that kind of programming. Body shops, as they called it, were getting started, etc. And when I was pregnant with Srikar, my youngest, and wanted to leave on maternity, I've met with a different kind of reception for that idea. And I was told, yes, you can keep your job, but you cannot keep your position. But I had worked really hard to move from system analyst to technical supervisor to project manager. And I thought, that's not fair. Maybe that was a suable offense, but I was very upset about losing all that I had gained and starting again. So I resigned, took some time off. That's when we actually made sure all these degrees were actually formally completed, and joined AT&T Bell Labs. It was a great time. AT&T Bell Labs is one of the best, I think, companies at that time in corporate America. They gave us a lot of time to study, to create. It was really, most of all the big companies that are there in the West Coast had their roots in AT&T Bell Labs. Wonderful things happened. You may find it hard to believe, but I actually met with Steve Jobs, who was doing his next computer at that time, next operating system. And he was really looking for, and AT&T had deep pockets, even though it was not particularly where it was, like, say, maybe 30 years ago. Our big rumbles were beginning. He came and he met Rajvarthi, my department head, and said that he was looking for somebody to use it in a corporate environment and test all the work that we're doing on the next OS system. I'm happy to say I volunteered, and we were doing system testing automation, and he even had two people help us to get going with the next OS. And after next system OS, and after a few months, I presented to him and the pros and cons, and he was very taken. He did talk to me at length. I had no idea that he was such a big giant. Then, of course, nothing much came out of it, because NextOS was bought for millions of dollars by Apple itself, and he returned to Apple. But those kind of opportunities happened in AT&T Bell Labs. People who invented Unix were working there. It was really something else to be amidst that kind of energy, and I will ever be grateful. I also got my MBA. They sponsored me to get the MBA from the Wharton School of Business. So it's a wonderful time. And then we started the entrepreneurship. This was 30 years in corporate America, about 10 years in entrepreneurship, and now we're trying to move on and try different things. But the important thing I learned from this whole process was, while the degrees helped, while they were objective measures of the fact that you were keeping track with and upgrading your skills, it's really the soft skills that helped a lot. The courage, for example, to reach inside and say that I'm going to make a call to a partner of a company. It might have been foolhardy, but when adversity comes, we face it with whatever we have to do. And that's what we did. And the strength to listen, learn, build a resilience when we failed. The most important takeaway from my looking back at my life was there really was nobody to get advice from. Normally you talk to your mother or to your sister or somebody who's been ahead of you a little bit and try to get. We were all struggling in the same boat, a little bit ahead, a little bit behind, but we're all in the same struggle. How are we going to be successful in the workplace, and how are we going to be successful at home? How are we going to make everything work together? So if there are any young people watching this, I would like to say that as important as it is to upgrade our education and keep ourselves at the learning edge of things, it's even more important to build trust, to speak up for ourselves, to actually take initiatives, to volunteer, to take risks, and so forth, and also to know when to leave. Because if you looked at any of at least in my case, if I looked at my parents, my grandparents, you joined a job and you worked there and left with the proverbial gold watch, you were there. That's where your rolling stone gathers no moss. We've heard that a lot. It's not a good thing to keep jumping. But though that particular value did not work in America, if you stayed there, you would just be forgotten. So these are lessons that we learned the hard way, not knowing exactly what's the right thing to do. As I mentioned, since we were settling, we did one of the happiest things was to pay this forward. Parents, siblings, uncles, aunts, friends, so many people were able to use our hand to cross this bridge and then settle either as student, went on to do studies, or became immigrants, or just came for visits and so forth. So that was a really happy outcome of having come here and just sharing the joy in a wide circle. And while I say this, and it is really exciting, we have to ask ourselves, but what else was happening behind the scenes? What else was it? Was it all a magical story with a happy ending? Well, I will share some of the highlights of the kind of experiences that many of us faced together. The very first one and the hardest one to face was our children going to schools where it was very clear that they looked different, and it was very clear that they were being excluded because we didn't belong, so to speak. It was very heartrending to see a young son actually doing so well at home, excited, curious, always reading, always on the move, always trying to do something exciting. As I drove him to school, you could feel him shutting down, and this is like first grade. And by the time he's reaching the door, it's like he has feet of lead. He's like concrete. He's really hesitant to go. Now, these are little children. They do not speak up and explain what it is that is bothering them. But we have to read the signs. There's nobody to tell us that maybe you need to do something. So, and I began to also get worried about going to school, because every day there was a note. He didn't listen. He didn't follow directions. There was nothing very specific. And so finally we said, the life is not still. And these are children who need to study. Everything that we are depending on is on education and the pursuit of excellence. What's our recourse? Should we move to sell our house, buy another house, move to a different school district, put them in private schools and stretch our financial affordabilities? Should we move to another city which has a higher immigrant presence in school? As it turned out, we tried all those things. We moved in Naperville itself. Then we did put them in, all of them went to private elementary schools. And then we did move to Homedale in New Jersey, where the AT&T Bell Labs had a very big presence, besides though I joined in Naperville. And they were much more comfortable among their numbers. But our relentless mantra at home was study, study, study. You have to pursue excellence. There is no other way. You got to get into positions of power and address inequity and bigotry. It's not going to happen by waiting for somebody to do it. All that we have, the real power we have, is in studying and in excelling. So that was the refrain and mantra in our house. There was no question. And the second side of what happened behind the scenes is the story of women. This is not to knock down any of the gentlemen who are here today on the call. It's about sharing how we perceived what we were doing and what were our feelings, our fears, our concerns. We did, when we came, regardless of whether we came from South India, North India, this state, that state, we all shared common values. Ours is an ancient heritage. The values are all very ancient. We were taught to respect them. We had traditional values, and the gender lines were very clearly demarcated. In every household, the dad worked, the father worked, and then the mother took care of the home. And even in those few cases that where there were working couples, like a wife was a doctor and a husband was an engineer, they always had a lot of household help. We know this. When we go outside the house, and then we can afford to hire a cook and a mali and a cleaner and a maid or a driver. But that's all the stuff that we all did here ourselves. We were drivers, we were everything. So the old order was really disturbed, and it was really not tenable as much as we tried. I think that I feel empathy for us as those young women who struggled thinking that, are we doing the right thing? Is this the right thing? Are the children not going to study well because I'm going to work? Are they never going to learn how to be respectful? Are they forgetting their language? Will they not learn all the religious things that were important to us? So, of course, in a Prasad household, it was not about teaching 2 or 3 slokas. It was learn the Rudram. Let's do the Lalita Sahasram. Let's get to it in the Vishnu Sahasram. There was no end to how much we pushed. Let's not forget the arts. Let's have the sitar teacher at 8:30 in the evening on a cold winter night, so he can come all the way to teach you last, because that's when we're all home. We kept pushing the children. And if we were pushing the children, you can imagine how much we pushed ourselves. We really stretched ourselves to breaking point. And it was not that there was no help. The only other person who could really help you was your partner. And we had across the whole spectrum, there were very helpful people to very hands-off people and everything in between. But it was a struggle. A lot of the burden was what we put on ourselves to make everything happen and not give up. Because just because we came here, we should not have to give up a lot of stuff. So there was the emergence of the superwoman among us. That is really what nobody knew about it until I recently saw this reference that said couch potatoes and superwomen. It was in that same time frame of 1975 to 1995. It was published in the University of Illinois. I would say it's a reading. It's based on letters that people wrote to the India Today, if you remember. It started as a newspaper and then looked a little bit like the Time magazine. Anyway, with no household helpers and the family help being varied across across each family, one real thing that happened with working women, and almost everybody tried to work because they wanted to contribute to the well-being and finances of the family. At the end of a man day of work, 8 hours, then there was the beginning of the next woman shift that started with chopping and cooking and teaching. You can see it. We've all done it. We were perpetually tired. And more importantly, we were agonized a lot. I think the thing we missed most when we came from India is nobody to advise you, nobody to tell you, maybe you're doing too much, maybe you're doing too little. How about you? It was all trial and error. Who knew where the results would go, but we kept trying. So this is how our life looked at the time, a feat of time management. Career was important, education was important, extended family was important. You can see it. And culturally, I have to say it was during that period that all these temples that we now enjoy and visit and have grown wonderfully well were all started at that time by people who invested money, by people who invested time. We contributed, we did our best to make sure that we had priests come and sculptors come. It was a huge thing. It's continuing on, but the fact is those were the first beginnings. And culturally also, we wanted to have cultural centers, literary centers. We held performances by legendary performers, and when they came, they stayed in our houses. And they were wonderful people. It was really a blessing to have them in our houses, but they were oblivious to the fact that there was no other help in the house. So you stretch some more to do everything, and the Atiti Deva Bhava, really, we tried our best to practice and so forth. All of those things took a toll, and while I put them here together, they never happened the way it really is being shown here. We did every day, we lived one day at a time. What's the focus today? We have to fix this problem that the child is having at school. There's an exam that I have to prepare for that's tomorrow. The India trip is coming up next week, and we've got to bring presents for all the family that we're going there because we love them and want to show our love. It's like endlessly we kept on doing whatever was the most important thing at that time, and never knowing how it would all turn out. By the grace of God and the blessings of elders and a lot of network of friends, we did come out the other end, so to speak. And I asked myself this question, Annapurna, of was our leap worth it? When we started that day in 1975, some 48 years ago. And I want to say yes, absolutely, resoundingly yes, because so many things happened. Our world itself changed. The world we came is not the world we live in right now in so many ways. Technology is one thing, but so many other ways also it changed. And the most poignant feeling I felt was, the feeling that came to me was, neither our mothers nor our daughters actually walked our path. Our mothers, because they didn't come here, they came as visitors, of course, and was wonderful, but actually trying to carve a path as they were crossing this chasm was something uniquely to our generation that came in that time frame. Our daughters were all American citizens, and they grew up with the culture here, so there was no cultural shock that they needed to go through, except what little the mothers were forcing on them at home. But in general, it was they felt comfortable in their skin, which was something that we had to learn the very hard way. And our children of that time also had to learn in the hard way. However, I feel like we did accomplish what we set out to do. We built a bridge across that chasm. We built it step by step. Each brick was baked as we were going along. We had to use the local ingredients. This is as a metaphor, and large helpings of common sense and trust and hope. And then our mom's secret sauces, like you have to study, you have to pursue excellence, you have to be nice. And creating some useful recipes Now, if our children have some issues of the types, they may not be the same types, but if they have it, there's somebody to talk to them. And they can call on their moms, their dads, their brothers, because we've been through that circuit. At least some of it will apply. So that, I think, was a valuable thing that we contributed. And I'm happy that I had the option and the choice to share these thoughts with you all. I hope it was worth it. This is about where I wanted to stop and ask if any of you had any questions.